well, welcome back. We have a great new guest with us, Bev Puckett or Beverly Puckett. So we have the 80th anniversary of the atomic bomb dropping, specifically Little Boy, which was August 6th of 1945. And so, again, coming up on the 80th year anniversary. How you worded it, I might get a little bit wrong before we started the podcast, is without the atomic bomb, you wouldn't be here, where, on the other side, there's a lot of people not here because of the atomic bomb. So could you give us a little bit of context to who you are, especially around why you're here because of the atomic bomb?
Jacob, thank you so much for having me. Yes, and it is a week from today. August 6th, 2025 will denote, celebrate, recognize, and memorialize that day, infamous day in history. Little Boy, Enola Gay, and all the many players that participated in this global changing event.
Absolutely.
And the reason that I say I wouldn't be here is because I literally would not have been born if it weren't for the atomic bomb. On one fateful day in October, my mother, Jane Halliburton Greer, stepped off a bus into 12 inches of mud and lost her shoe. She was met by her girlfriend, who was supposed to be her roommate at Oak Ridge, and a very tall, good-looking gentleman who was dating at the time this mother's roommate. And he came and rescued Mother but could not find her shoe, but helped with the suitcase and escorted Mother up the stairs of the guest house in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So that starts that story of the meeting of Jane Halliburton Greer and my father, James Beverly Puckett.
Wow.
Okay?
He was a Kentuckian, right? Your dad?
And my dad was from Kentucky. But let's go back in time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
My father, James Beverly Puckett, was born in 1918 to Egbert Barnabas Puckett and Mary Bondrett Perkins Puckett. Both of my parents, by the way, were born when their parents were at or over 40, which was remarkable back in 1918 and 1922.
Yeah.
So that makes his story even more interesting, especially since Daddy was born during what is now called, after that horrible pandemic, the Spanish flu.
Which killed more people than World War I.
Which, yeah.
Like 50 million people or 40 million?
I do not know those numbers, but so that makes it even more interesting. My father's father, my grandfather, could not read or write, born in 1869. Wow. So talking about the amount that he saw from the time of his death to 1948 is remarkable, from the human scope of life and changes on this mortal globe that we occupy. So that's a little bit of Dad. He was the 11th of 12, very bright, but a little sickly. He had kind of a heart murmur, but had 6 older sisters that survived. One other sister died before Daddy was born. So, but we still say he was the 11th of 12, and then he had 3 older brothers and a younger brother. So, yes, there was a younger Puckett from after Dad, with a father born in 1869. But, and Dad grew up, very interested in electronics. The movies started coming to town, and he got a job working at movie theaters and was just enamored by the electricity and all that, And my studies of what's happened in our history, by the way, Daddy was born in 1918, as I mentioned, and it was the same year that refrigerators and electric washing machines were introduced to homes in the United States. So that gives you an idea of what's happening for our lifetime. So he worked in movie theaters, and Kentucky at the time also, along with Tennessee, was known for flooding. And so he figured out about how to work with radios and electronics, and he even used walkie-talkies to help save people from floods when he was in high school. He had learned about a school out in L.A., And so he went to, for 2 years, a radio electronics school in Los Angeles, California. And he was there during the burgeoning time in the late 30s of the growth of LA and the beauty
Early
of
Hollywood.
and the beauty
Yeah.
and
Early
the beauty
cinema.
and of cinema and all
How
that.
old would your dad have been about that time?
Daddy graduated from high school in 1937. And so he was out in LA from like 37 to 40.
So he was 18,
Yeah.
17, 18,
he
19.
was 18.
Wow.
Yeah, 18, and then and was out there and was a busboy and worked at the Brown Derby, and I mean, you know, who all he probably waited on or saw, he couldn't recall today.
Right.
But just to give you an example of how he looked, people confused him later on in life with Art Carney. So my dad,
I definitely know who Art Carney is.
my dad looked like Art Carney. So he was out in L.A.
I don't know who Art Carney is.
For all the viewers as well,
Oh,
my
wow.
screen may be shared as well.
The guy that we've all seen in many movies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, he was Ralph Cranston's sideman in Honeymooners.
Yes, my dad looked like Art Carney.
Very cool.
So, and he was out in L.A. So, so during this time on Dad's early life, my mother was born to parents that were 42 years old in 1922 in Paris, Tennessee. Mother life was a bit different. She, oh, by the way, my dad's mother could read, and of course all of his older brothers and sisters went, and they had a diversity in their family of musicians and characters and very strong men, and they were kind of, some of his brothers were kind of known as roughnecks because they kind of were on their little, they had their own little police force because they had all these Puckett boys. So it was, and tobacco, and I forgot to mention that. Jim's giving us a thumbs up as he's chewing on his nicotine gum. But anyway, but tobacco was big, and Dad even told stories, and I'm sorry I didn't mention this earlier, of being on the low, kind of flat bed that would hold tobacco sprouts, or, well, not sprouts, but
Little like sprigs,
plugs, they called them. And he would sit with another little kid, and at 5 and 6 years old, and they would they'd each get a plug, and the mule would take one step forward and then put a plug in the ground, and the mule would take one step forward,
tobacco.
and they were planting tobacco. So we have pictures of my great-grandfather in a warehouse. Francis Jackson Perkins and a lot of people in a Kentucky warehouse selling at auction, just piles of tobacco leaves, of different leaves. And I am not a smoker. I don't like tobacco, except for, as a child, going through the different farms that the family had in Kentucky, smelling tobacco curing in barns.
I bet that's
is fabulous.
Yeah.
It is the cleanest smell in this world, and I just loved it. We'd jump on a mule or an old horse and ride around, the farms and whatever as a kid. And so, yes, I grew up understanding tobacco. So anyway, that's a
too bad you don't smoke.
I'm lucky I don't smoke.
I know
It's prevented me from having a lot more wrinkles than I already have.
Just if I can interject real quick, a friend of mine who came from the same kind of environment, his father worked on a tobacco farm as a little kid, and he had allergies and stuff, and he complained to his father, my buddy's granddad. He complained to him, Dad, this work, I just don't feel comfortable out here doing it. I have allergies or whatever. So what did his father do? His father handed him a pack of Lucky Strikes, non-filtered cigarettes, and said, "Why don't you get on these and you'll start smoking these, and then you'll be fine." And he did, and he wound up working on the tobacco farm. Of course, years later, it almost killed him. He had to quit smoking totally. It was. But that was the kind of the health advice back in those days.
They used to be prescribed.
Those were the good old days, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bev. Keep going. Sorry.
I remember seeing Dad smoke when I was about 7 or 8 because of his allergies and sinuses, and he took out I saw him smoke one cool, something cool, but that's the only time I ever saw him smoke.
So I was about to ask, was he predominantly like a pipe smoker or
Nothing.
no? It was all okay.
Nothing.
Wow.
But what he did smoke, his sisters and brothers made up for it, let me tell you, okay? And my first cousins. So that's no worry. They kept the tobacco industry alive in Kentucky. Trust me, okay? And so mother was born in May of 1922 with an older sister who was less than 18 months older than Mom. To older parents, Mother's parents were 42 when she was born. Her father owned a transfer and storage company in a town called Paris, Tennessee. His name was William Halliburton Greer. My grandmother's parents moved up to West Tennessee. Her grandfather had founded Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, and then had gone up to start another college in Grenada, Mississippi, where she was born. And then he left that and became an itinerant Methodist minister. And they ended up in beautiful Paris, Tennessee, which is the home of the land between the lakes, where the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River converge to join the Tennessee River before it dumps into the Ohio River. And my grandfather's family goes way back in that era to the point where Mother's some of her ancestors are founding families of the state with the names of Wells, Fort, Battle. And my mother, this is very interesting. And I've known Jim for 20 years, and I told him we could be related distantly because my mother is actually named for Jane Vernon Hampton Fort, from Virginia and South Carolina, and came over and helped founding families of the state of Tennessee and the city of Nashville. So my history goes back that far, but there's also a bit of national historical history with my family in that era, and it goes back to one of those bigger than life characters by the name of Davy Crockett.
Okay.
My great grandfather on my grandfather's side was William Fitzgerald, and he was a very slight man of about 5'2". His father had divorced his mother, and they moved all the sons to West Tennessee to start this farm in the beautiful, very rich alluvial farmland of West Tennessee. And he was very smart, and family records have it that he even went back to Ireland for study, then came back to West Tennessee and was an attorney and got this bright idea that he was going to run for Congress against Davy Crockett. Well, he did. And they were out on a stump, literally in Jackson, Tennessee. Davy Crockett, 6'1", my grandfather, about 5'2" or 5'3", looks up at Davy Crockett. Looks up at Davy Crockett while they're stumping, and literally Papa Fitzgerald, we affectionately call him that, was standing on a stump. And Davy Crockett was talking, and Papa Fitzgerald still had to look up at him. And at one point, Davy Crockett looks down at my grandfather and says, my opponent is so insignificant, I could eat him alive. And my grandfather, valiantly, with a lot of aplomb, looks up at him and goes, well, if you do, my dear sir, you'd have more brains in your belly than you do in your head.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Now we see
and
where
I never
you
knew
got...
Davy Crockett ran for Congress. I never knew he was even a political figure at all.
Twice.
Wow.
My grandfather only stayed in Congress for 2 years. We have his letters written home. I wrote a senior high school thesis on those letters, went to the archives, pulled out microfiche, even saw the article in the Jacksonian Democrat from Jackson, Tennessee, that even quoted that famous stump retort, okay? So, and it's very, and this is a beginning to what we call the Puckett small world story, where I've joked that we can take 6 degrees of separation and reduce it to a degree and a half. And I say it started with Davy Crockett. My grandmother had not seen my grandfather since he was a child. My grandfather had returned to practice law and run the family farm in West Tennessee and got a letter from Port Tobacco, yes, Tobacco, Maryland. That's where my great-great-great-great-grandmother moved to with the girls, and goes, what's going on? He opens it up, and pinned in this letter states, "My dearly beloved but not forgotten son William, I have learned these many days, these past 2 years, from the Honorable Davy Crockett, that you were just a mere carriage ride, one day's carriage ride away from me in Washington, D.C." He was in Washington. She was in Port Tobacco, Maryland. He didn't know it. And she learned it from Davy Crockett, who rewon the seat because my grandfather did not commit for his seat again.
Wow.
And that was in 1832. And then right after that, Davy Crockett was only in for 2 years and then went to the Alamo, and then we know his fate.
If I can ask real quick.
That's a very small world story. And then you'll see later on why I'm mentioning that to you.
Jane Vernon Hampton.
Vernon Hampton.
Who is she now again?
She's a great, like, once aunt of some sort.
Okay, and you said she came from Virginia?
Virginia and South Carolina.
That's because we have learned through my middle brother, who's doing a ton of research on our family. I think I've told you, shared with you. We've identified our great-great-great-grandfather. His name was Washington Ephraim Hampton, and he lived in Virginia and then came down to South Carolina. It would have been about 1840, because he died in 1852. He was born in 1802, and I think it was 1802 or 1800, and he died in 1852. Does that timeline tie in with...
Well, Jane Vernon Hampton, the family could have also, the Hamptons probably just split off or whatever. And this could have been a Hampton from like the 1740s because, like, I know my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother Elizabeth Bondurant married John Perkins. That's why my grandmother has the name Bondurant, but that marriage took place in 1794 in Virginia on my dad's side. So this Hampton probably happened way back, it was way back then, because she came to West Tennessee in like 1811, from what I think, about 18, I don't know, in the early 1800s, from what I understand, about the same time Papa Fitzgerald and his family came over. But Papa Fitzgerald ended up in West Tennessee in like 1806, I think, when he was 6, from what I remember hearing. So that's the history of Mom's family, which I think is very interesting. Okay, so moving forward, mother was very bright. Her sister was not very athletic. My mother was, to the point where Mother wanted to join the circus when she was 4.
Wow.
And very limber. We've got a picture of her doing the splits on the porch, touching her toes with her chin on the porch itself. Anyway, she ended up skipping 2 grades in school because she was, as they say, so precocious. Okay, but due to her mother's not being well, Mother stayed over an extra year and took typing and some other subjects in school before she went to a school in Alabama called Judson College, where her sister had gone. By the way, her mother had been a school teacher in both English and algebra, and was very bright and helped start this reading society called the Adelphian Society in Paris, that's still ongoing, for women to have a book club and read books and whatnot. So I'm proud of that. And I also carry my grandmother's maiden name, which is Newell. So she was Hattie Lou Newell Greer, and so I'm Beverly Newell Puckett. I'm Beverly Jr., because I'm the firstborn, and Dad's middle name is Beverly. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way. So Mother ended up going to Judson College, and her sister had already transferred to the University of Tennessee after 2 years, so Mother transferred to the University of Tennessee after 2 years. And this is where the story begins, okay? Mother stood in line in 1942 after having all of her core courses
This is at UT?
at UT to register in the summer of 42 the School of Engineering.
And how
Yeah.
many women, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bev. How many women do you think were in the school at that time?
At UT?
Yep.
At
It's
Tennessee?
a handful, right?
Jim, that is a really good question. I have no clue.
Because a lot of women didn't go to college
no,
in
a lot
those
of women
days.
did not go to college,
And especially in the engineering department.
Well, that's just it. There were none.
She was the only engineering?
No, they would not let Mother in the School of Engineering because of her gender. I think UT at the time was maybe 3,000 to 4,000 students, maybe, I don't know. I mean, the school, University of Tennessee is one of the oldest schools east of the Mississippi in the country. It was founded in 1794, known as Blount College by the Presbyterian Church in Knoxville. So Blount College goes back even before the state of Tennessee by 2 years. And so it's got a long, glorious history of academia, but it kind of stifled women. Because the women that went to school at UT, a lot of them majored in like maybe nursing and maybe administrative work, some in School of Business, but a lot in home economics, okay? So we had to make our tea and put the linens on the table properly, okay? So
We were just talking, my mom and I, that there's like no home ec anymore, and I was helping fold a sheet, and I was like, is it clear that I didn't take home ec, in school? And yeah. It is a skill. I mean, again, people
I'm not making fun of that,
Yeah.
but I mean, I'm just talking about the late 30s, early 40s,
Yeah.
where
The
women
limited-
what women were supposed to do, especially if you were more on the western side, the western side of the Appalachians, then maybe more on the east coast with the elder, the more renowned institutions.
And really quick, there is no definitive data about the enrollment of UT in 1942, but they opened it up to be coeducational or co-ed in 1892, so 50 years prior.
Thank you, Jacob. I did not know that. And here I am, one of the past presidents of the Alumni Association, so I should have known that.
Well, services only Google and I could provide together, right?
Well, we all know that the Google machine is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. And it's always truthful, never tells a lie. And
Yeah, right. Okay. Anyway, Mother was standing in line, and as she put it, she said this nice, tall gentleman, scholarly gentleman, pulled her aside and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not able to matriculate in these studies." So he pulled her aside, and finished the conversation about what she wanted to do. And she had gotten all of her core courses, like with straight A's in Judson College and Lower Alabama, as she said. And so he said, well, let me tell you what. I'm in the School of Business. We have a very good governmental economics program. We will put, I want you to study in that arena there, and then what you want to do for electives, go to it. So Mother went to the School of Business Economics, governmental economics, but she thought, well, I'll show them. So that was not on the Hill. The School of Business was not on the Hill, but the Hill had beautiful Ayers Hall, which you see here, a view of it. On the back of it, on the hill at UT.
Is that the main image?
That's
that
the main
see
image of UT because it's way literally on the hill overlooking the Tennessee River.
Was one of the first things?
Yes.
Was it the original college?
Well, no, the original college was a log cabin, a building kind of, but it built around it. But she took things like physics.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Yep. And again, we might be able to show viewers that as well.
She took things like physics, analytical calculus,
as electives,
differential equations,
as electives. Those are hard classes too.
They were very hard, very hard classes. Oh, I digress. Let me go back. Mother and Dad graduated from high school, and the funny thing about this is, just to let you know, and I'm saying this for a reason. They were both voted wittiest of their class in high school, okay? So mother was also known not only for her brilliance and daddy, but for their witticism. So I didn't want to forget that since we're talking about their life pre-Oak Ridge, okay?
Yeah.
So mother, and I probably took speech courses, English courses, and whatnot. And she had been a known debater in high school. She was like debate champion for the state of Tennessee in high school as well, as on top of everything else. And so she graduated in August of 43 and had been getting letters all over from Boston College, Boston University, Syracuse. Come to work for GE, come up here in Boston and study, the whole business. And she was thinking, well, maybe I'll do that, but I'm losing classmates to the war. I want to do something for the war. Well, the gentleman that pulled her aside a year earlier came to her and said, I think I have a job for you. And so mother went and interviewed with these very stern people that were called Tennessee Eastman, and for a job in East Tennessee for what she understood was the war effort.
So this was like a secretive.
This was.
Did she tell you about that meeting? I mean, growing up. So were they in military uniforms?
No.
I'm picturing in my mind like at the beginning of Indiana Jones when he goes in and meets with the guys with the pipe and the guys in the suits with one's got a pipe and they're like, "So Dr. Jones, what do you know about the Holy Grail or whatever?" Anyway, go ahead.
Well, what's so funny about this? Tennessee Eastman was basically just some executives from Kingsport, Tennessee. Because Kingsport was the home of, it was chemicals.
Eastman Chemical.
Eastman Chemical up in Tennessee.
Which Eastman was, an offshoot of Kodak, founded by George Eastman.
Interesting.
One of the great American originals.
Yes, very good. And because the project was so big, that the Corps of Engineers utilized local talent in the area as administrative arms of the Manhattan Project from the Corps of Engineer, whatever. So Tennessee Eastman kind of oversaw basically the hiring, and mother was hired by Tennessee Eastman, and it was men. I'm sure there might have been some Corps of Engineer men there, and there might have been an atomic scientist, but she didn't know who was who, really, because you didn't know.
It was purposely siloed. You get this piece of information.
But she never found out.
It was totally siloed.
She never found out.
Who the men were that interviewed her?
Yeah. Did she ever find?
Good question. I do not know.
Okay.
I never asked.
They had these little pen devices that erase your Men in Black.
I didn't see that much.
It's not
Men in
that
Black's
great.
Super movie. But yeah. So the next thing she knew, she was interviewed for this job, basically being told what she was going to do. Okay, so she went home to be with her dad, and that was in August. And then in October, we go back now to that fateful day in October where she steps off the bus. Yep. Daddy had already gone back to Kentucky and was teaching radio electronics to servicemen that were at Kentucky. Because the university stayed alive back then during the war for renting out spaces and training servicemen for the different aspects in the service, or universities would not have stayed open. So guess what mother did in the late summer and early spring of 42? She taught physics to Army Air Corpsmen at the University of Tennessee. So here she was, a 20 and 21-year-old petite brunette teaching physics to Army Air Corps men, at Knoxville. So Daddy had done the same up at University of Kentucky and was doing evidently a little research at Kentucky, which is bad because I never really found out about exactly what he did. But that fateful day in Oak Ridge in October is when they met.
And she lost her shoe in the mud.
She lost her shoe in the mud.
And that the one that became lost became the shoe of the famous Cinderella story.
Right, exactly. That's very funny. Yeah, exactly. But just so to let you know the magnanimity of the project, Mother was interviewed in like August of 42, July or August of 42. September of 42, men were walking around looking at property in Tennessee about where to put this and where to do this, and
Like developers or surveyors or kind of quasi both, or
well, it was
Government people.
major
gotcha.
government.
I'm following. Okay.
Major government.
We have a
people.
project to kickstart, and this is an idea,
Yeah.
an area that we're going to figure out where exactly to start it off at.
Exactly.
Yeah, got it.
So there's a lot of mysticism involved with this too, and I will go into that in a minute. But so they were walking around, and a lot of local people were involved, but they were talking about the river and the railroads and all that, and it needed to be close to a big city and whatever. Well, the story is too that in end of 41 or end of 42, that a lot of high level people met at this place called the Grove, north of San Francisco, the Bohemian Grove,
okay,
and
yeah.
it was men only, and it had a lot to do with the elites in San Francisco, the art community, the transportation community, the electrical and grid and the
Utilities,
utilities and transportation and shipping and all that, as well as Berkeley and Caltech and all those colleges around there. Of course, you dribble in E.O. Lawrence and you dribble in Robert Oppenheimer, and to name a few of those elites that were there talking at the
This was Epstein's Island pre-Epstein. No, I'm kidding.
I don't think so, but good luck if you can get a witness for that for your next
Right.
podcast, okay? So anyway, the story is that they were talking at the Grove about how things were proceeding with the studies at University of Chicago with plutonium, the calutron, and the electromagnetic separation that was going on at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories in California. And so they knew, that's when they knew that the atomic bomb was probably going to happen. Yep. And so they needed a site. And a lot of times, information was being fed out to the West Coast about the sites, okay? And the Manhattan Project gets its name because it was located at all of these different areas around Manhattan, okay? You can literally go on a Manhattan Project tour of Manhattan, but it's not one building, it's like 7, okay?
Wow.
Because they kept it so separated. And a building space was needed for this part of the war effort, and building space was needed for this part of the war effort. So a lot of the things, it was separated, but it needed to be. So they had the Bohemian Grove meeting, and then all of that information was shot to Franklin Roosevelt, okay? And so Franklin Roosevelt, as story goes, called in Senator McKellar. I think his name, Kenneth Douglas McKellar from Memphis, okay? Now he, like my grandfather, was born in 1869, but was learned. I don't know where I didn't study where McKellar went to college, but very smart man, and had the purse strings for the Senate.
Okay.
And so the story says that President Roosevelt came to McKellar and said, "We need you to hide $2 billion in your budget for this coming year." And McKellar stands back and goes, "Well, of course so, but exactly where in Tennessee will this be built?" Okay.
Yep.
So I think McKellar already knew that they were looking at Tennessee for something,
Right.
because it was so big.
He had his little birds out.
The little
yeah.
birds out. Whatever, you don't know, but
Right.
there's always a little bit of
Rumor mill.
and
Yeah.
a little mysticism and all of that goes into these stories. the folklore aspect of this.
Right.
What do you do? And
especially when, like you're saying, it's so purposely siloed. A lot of it is purposely not documented. So it's a lot of picking up pieces, in retrospect that, were purposely, in some cases, not left.
Well, no, the press didn't get a hold of it. Really, I mean, it's amazing about the press.
The secrecy, yeah.
And the secrecy of it. And so when Daddy got there,
and there were no leakers.
Well, and again, it's something to be said.
That's a good point.
Like the media is, and to some degree, still in bed with a lot of the larger political organizations. So it's like, hey, you leak this story, you're not going to get any access to more information that's going to keep you relevant.
Yeah, there had been leakers prior to that, though. I do know from another story that was going
widespread,
on. But there were some leakers regarding not the bomb. I don't know. That's interesting. I would like to know more about that in a way. And I wonder, if we talk about the book about Mother, The Girls of Atomic City, Denise Kiernan might know, who's the author, whom I adore. She's wonderful. Denise, if you're watching, hi. So they finally broke ground in like the end of October, 1st November of 42. Daddy got there in April of 42, okay?
Yeah.
His badge number was 1885. Now remember that. Mother's badge number was 2449, 6 months later.
Okay, wow.
Okay.
600 plus people onboarded.
Yeah. Okay. But
6 months.
By 1945, there were 70,000 people working there.
At Oak Ridge?
Well, across the Manhattan Project, right?
Across the whole
project.
project.
Mother's badge numbers had to do. Well, I'm saying 70. Maybe it's 70,000 across the whole thing. Maybe it was. They planned for 13,000 in the city of Oak Ridge. Well, the city of Site X.
Right.
And there ended up being 35,000 living there. But that didn't include the people that were bussed in.
Right.
Into the 7 different gates from all over. Okay. Now, because they were looking at this land in September of 42 and had already been looking, a lot of the people that were living there had already been misplaced because of TVA 10 years earlier. A lot of the same people were given 3 months to get up and pack out and leave again. And you're talking hardworking, scrap apple, Scots-Irish, a lot of Germans, Austrians that had settled in that area of the country, told to get up and leave, okay? Which was amazing. Which leads me to the story of John Hendricks. And this brings in a little bit of mysticism in this before we talk about what went on with the project and what Mom and Dad did, okay? The story goes like this. Around the turn of the 20th century, John Hendricks's youngest child, and he resided in this area called Bear Creek, youngest child died. His wife blamed him for the child's death as he had corrected this young child a couple of days before she died. His wife took the other children and went to Arkansas, never to return. Hendricks was very upset about this and prayed to God. Very religious people back then as well, too. Churches were the side of the community, as you can well imagine, as depicted in our history books from back then. During one prayer, he heard a loud voice telling him to sleep on the ground and he would learn the future of this place. Hendricks did as the voice told him. And it must have been in the winter because one story tells of his hair being frozen to the ground. When he returned from 40 nights sleeping on the ground, he had tremendous stories to tell. And he told anyone who would listen. He said, "I've seen it. Bear Creek Valley someday will be filled with great buildings and factories, and they will help toward winning the greatest war that ever will be. And there will be a city on Black Oak Ridge. The center of authority will be on a spot that is middle way between Sevier Tadlock's farm and Joe Pyatt's place. A railroad spur will branch off the main L&N line and run down toward Robertsville. And then it will branch off and turn towards Scarborough. It will serve the great city I saw in my vision. Big engines will dig ditches, and thousands of people will be running to and fro. They will be building things, and there will be great noise and confusion, and the earth will shake. I've seen it. It's coming.
And so that's all, as I understand it, right? Essentially a vision. Like, he's obviously part of the conversations but
this was 40 years earlier.
Whoa. Yeah. But so
Mysticism.
Yeah, I mean,
this story.
So was that actually published before, 40 years before it was published, or it wasn't put together?
No,
and
he
published?
was known as
He was a clairvoyant.
Clairvoyant.
Was he considered that before
well,
all this?
He even was put in a mental institution and predicted that the mental institution would be in flames before certain ended, and the mental institution was hit by lightning and burned down 4 days later.
I do think there is something more to understanding reality than what we, typically make it out to be. That I don't think that, like, there's, the whole concept of remote viewing, that's not something that I'll ever pretend to understand. But I do think there are sort of premonitions that you can, like, have an understanding of what's to come before it happens. And it's almost like that, how I think about ideas as well, that if you're just tuned to the right signal, right,
you're
you'll
picking
pick
up
it
a
up,
frequency
and
that
then,
nobody else is getting.
Right, and then you're able to rebroadcast it as well, right? And it's like,
and that's that fits in with your vision of drone usage throughout the world,
right,
on a much more
everyday basis.
Every
basis. Household, every business is relying on a drone, just as we do cars and computers today.
Well, just to let you know a little bit about him, I'm sorry about this. It's this article says he was born in Bear Creek Valley, where I mentioned, he said, on November 9th, 1865. So when he made this premonition, he was like in his 40s. He was born very near Building 9201-4, which stands today in the heart of the Western Protected Area of Y-12. That's one of the Calutron buildings. He died June the 2nd, 1915, and is buried in Hendricks Creek subdivision in Oak Ridge in a single grave plot in Bobby Ledford's yard. I don't know who Bobby Ledford. Well, I think Mother and Dad knew the Ledfords, but yeah. So the man was
talk about an oracle.
I have one of my sorority sisters, older sisters, married his grandson. So I've got the 6 degrees of separation.
Yep.
I've got that connection to him through a sorority sister. Yeah. So isn't that interesting? But the vision he had is frightening about that. So I wanted to bring all of this together because of.
Yeah, how connected all of the world is, right? But even, on a smaller scale, how, all these different independent pieces of a project, can date back to 30, 40 years prior that were seemingly unrelated,
Where he had that vision, it's unbelievable. And so the Hendrix name is big, and it's Hendrix is the spelling of that, Hendrix. But so you had all of this, this coming together, and people losing their farmland and all of that, and that happened. But it was it was unbeknownst to, like, Mother and Dad that came in, when they brought people in to this. So when Mother met Dad, he was already working on the test magnet in what was called Building 9731. Don't ask me how they got that number. I do not know. A lot of people speculate it might be part of the latitude and longitude numbers added together and made some number. I don't know. But they've come up with these numbers. Now,
I think it was after building 9,730 and before building 9,000.
It didn't work that way. But let me tell you one thing, y'all. One of the reasons that Oak Ridge, I've heard, was because of TVA, the power was unbelievable that TVA offered, okay? But the geographical aspect of the land is something you rarely see, where you see these ridges that are not like ridges that you see in the Rockies that are sharp and pointed. They're more rounded ridges because it's part of the Appalachian chain, which is the oldest mountain range in the world. It's a spinoff from the Cumberlands too, but regardless. But it's also very flat, so it'll go from a ridge to flat, back to a ridge again. So you're protected on both sides, okay? And there's another saying too, that this was furthest away, the closest to the East Coast, for some reason from a transportation standpoint, but the furthest away that German U-boats missiles could not hit.
Okay.
I wanted to throw that in since your drone interest.
Yep.
So I wanted to mention that because I always heard that growing up, that was one of the reasons it was chosen. And as a result, they built Oak Ridge so fast that's why there's mud, because you had these ridges and the water would just run down and just throw mud on in the flat areas. You couldn't help it because they had to build places for people to live so quickly. Okay.
Call in the Jews. We need someone to control the weather. No, I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, Oppenheimer was doing his darndest over at anyway. Well, anyway, so Dad was working at 9731 on the test magnets, okay, for the actual fission of U-235, which was the electromagnetic process of popping them as opposed to gaseous diffusion and the stockpile program, okay? We can go into that in a little bit, but I'm not going to try to get into too much of the weeds with that. But it turns out that while Daddy was working on that, they were also planning on, with the formula working, doing the calutrons, which were big U-shaped areas where those women would sit in that famous picture, and they would turn knobs to verify when, right at the optimal point, when that would split. And so they were just told to do that. And so Daddy worked with Frank Oppenheimer on the wiring of the big test magnets, okay? And then at one point, and my brother Greer reminded me of this recently, that some really smart man, very good-looking man from California was there, and they were building the calutrons, and how far into this process is, I do not know. But to pull power, you need vacuum to make the power run into vacuum, whatever. And the man looked at Dad and said, I'm having trouble with this. It's not pulling consistently the way I want to pull it. And Dad said, I think the vacuum tubes are too close together. So they moved them and it worked. The man that said that to my father was the Nobel Prize physicist E.O. Lawrence. And my father told him the vacuum tubes were too close together, who had gotten an associate's degree in radio electronics in L.A.
It is interesting, and I could be getting the wrong person, but this is dating back like 15 plus years ago. I was watching a History Channel show at the time called American Pickers, and they ended up at the house of someone I think related to Henry Kissinger, who he was involved in the Manhattan Project to some degree, right? Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but it was some like really bright like scientist like who you'd think like has all the answers, right? And his car broke down outside of like Caltech or some university and didn't know how to change a flat tire. And it was just like, this super brainy-eyed genius can't figure out, one of the most basic, sort of maintenance tasks that, is required still today,
Yeah.
Pop a tire.
Just as an aside on life at Oak Ridge, people came from all over, literally all over. And Mother was, I think at one point, I think she did have a car at one point. Anyway, she was driving a car and it was a 5-speeder, 4-speeder, and they were going from one place to another on site at Oak Ridge. And one of the guys in the car was, how do you know how to do that? And she was driving a stick shift. Well, he was an atomic physicist or chemist or something from Oak Ridge. Not from New York City. Yep. He had never even learned how to drive a car. and was asking Mom how she could do it. So Mother lived it. I mean, she saw it, because you're bringing all these different cultures together. People didn't know how to drive cars back then.
Right.
Yeah, really, seriously. So that was really interesting from that regard. So that was a side story about what Dad did, and he was real instrumental in working on the design of the pulling of the fission on the big magnets and whatnot. And then later, he supervised in those buildings the Calutrons. If they broke down, he would fix them and whatever. Now, what amazes me, and I know you're going to ask this, and I cannot believe, me majoring in science, I never asked, how come they didn't get why they didn't get cancer from all of this. But it wasn't really radioactive yet.
Right.
It was
Until it's detonated.
It was a fissionable
isotope, right?
It was an isotope of fissionable product.
Yeah.
Okay. So they didn't really get it, but it did get to the point where it was radioactive, but it was not at that point where, because of the processes it went through for purification. Okay. And I don't want to get in the weeds on that, because
Well, yeah.
I could have stayed up all night studying, trying to remember it, because I don't use it every day. You lose it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay. So all this while,
I have no such excuse.
all this while, Mother was finishing at UT, and then came in October, and then immediately was sent to take a course on the formula. Now, the formula Mother worked on was the production formula for the actual fission itself.
Wow.
And so when they hired her, they knew what she was going to be doing. And she ended up overseeing initially a small amount of people. Well, she was working in a small group, and then when it expanded and the formula kind of worked, then they went from 40 to over to 100 women. Some of them would have to do handwritten notes and figures from what they were told to do. Others stood in line early to try to get to where they could use the Marchand calculator. But it was Mother who took all their findings to review them to be sure that they were somewhat even. Well, from a statistical standpoint, you're going to be looking at a parabolic curve anyway. And all of this had to do with parabolic curves and whatever about the success of the fission and the purity of it. So Mother would, in turn, at the end of every shift, verify their input and hand it over to guards, who would then take it to another level. But as a result, Mother, as she was smart enough to kind of figure out, I don't think I never asked her, but she didn't take chemistry at UT. But she knew something was happening because of her security clearance was pretty darn high. It had to have been. And then she was very aware that General Groves and Oppenheimer were standing over her shoulder on several occasions.
Now, if I may interject real quick, General Groves is the Matt Damon character in the Oppenheimer film,
Thank
right?
you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
General Groves. I mentioned him earlier.
Very instrumental.
I apologize about not going into a little bit more detail. He was chosen along with Lieutenant Nichols, and Lieutenant Nichols, I think, is also an Oppenheimer movie, to oversee the Manhattan Project through the Corps of Engineer and Army General, okay? And so Groves, when you saw him in Oppenheimer, sometimes, I think one of the scenes was actually him in Oak Ridge, to be honest with you. They didn't say it. Yeah. But in Los Alamos, he would go back and forth. Nichols stayed in Oak Ridge mostly. And he oversaw basically everything that was going on with the Manhattan Project. When they moved the plutonium project out to Hanford, Washington, he oversaw that, went to Los Alamos, and whatever, and everything flowed up to General Groves. Well, Mother got to know him personally because she couldn't just oversee 40 to 100 women on the production formula for the atomic bomb. She had to be involved in tennis and had to be involved in church and had to be involved in starting this women's organization of all the women that had gone to college to help raise scholarship money for the women from Appalachia. So Mama did that too, of course. So the money that they helped raise came from babysitting. So Mother babysat Grove's kids.
Wow.
Have you ever talked to them? Because they're still, I would think, his
The Grove's kids?
Are they
No,
all-
I've never met the kids. Good
you
question.
would you would really enjoy, because your mother would have babysat them, and they would have funny stories, I'm sure, about your
Their babysitter, yeah.
She was
Well,
a pain in the ass because
yeah, I just hope they didn't do what I did. My brothers and I used to tire up our babysitters and act like, cheers. I don't think they did that to Mother. But anyway, that's another story. So that, just life at Oak Ridge, they tried to make life at Oak Ridge just go on. And it was so interesting. But so I said that Mother was supposed to room with the woman that picked her up that was seeing Daddy at the time. And when Daddy was really, like the big man on campus too, tall, good-looking guy from Kentucky with a car, okay? So all the women liked him, okay? Well, Mother never got to room with this woman because there were so many coming in to work. They literally had dorm life. It was like a dorm life. So the Manhattan Project would go around and literally find young girls that were graduate that would go to the high school and find out who had the adroitness with numbers, let's put it that way, the ability to calculate the thought process, who were the good graduates that could do a specific job. Yep. So, they weren't stalkers, but it was like the Secret Service would go around
scouting
and scouring. And so there was literally one woman that was sitting in, you've always heard being discovered at the soda fountain in L.A. Well, there was one woman that was discovered in the soda fountain in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where you went to college.
Yep. Wow.
And was one of the Calutron girls, literally, and was brought to Oak Ridge to work straight out of high school because they had she was one that had the aptitude, for numbers. So they literally came from all over. So the girls had no dream of ever going to college back post-Depression and during the war, but they got to have the dorm life,
Yeah, so like the camaraderie
and everything. So literally a city was born overnight. Kids would walk to school one way, and they would come back and didn't recognize how to get home because 10 houses would have been put up that day with modular housing, okay? Wow. All over Oak Ridge. It was so interesting, and the houses were A houses, B houses, C houses, D houses, E houses. And the further you went up the hill, the nicer the houses got. It's because the higher you were in the hierarchy on at site X. So
do you know where Oppenheimer lived?
He lived in Los Alamos.
So would he would fly in?
Well, yeah, would fly in or
yeah, however they decided was quickest,
or train in or whatever. They had the big administrative building that John Hendricks talked about in his vision, the castle on the hill, and it was like a big guest house with suites and whatnot in it.
So you both mentioned the Oppenheimer movie a couple of times. Not my favorite by any stretch of the imagination, but there was talk, and there's mention of it beyond the movie, but I think it became popular to a lot of people. This whole idea that we weren't sure if the whole atmosphere would combust, when we dropped the first bomb, doing the first test. And, was that something, as I'm trying to understand it, like what your mother was involved with the formulation? Like, hey, this is essentially on paper what should happen if the bomb is dropped in our atmosphere.
No.
Okay.
No. Mother and Dad's goal was to produce the fissionable product.
Okay. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know the end product.
Daddy did.
He did know that it was a bomb.
Dad knew what was going. Dad figured it out. But you would go to UT library and look at the chemistry books, and if a book is well worn, you would turn to a certain page. Thumbprints, it was dirty around uranium and plutonium when you would look.
He told you that
Daddy, I don't know if Dad went to UT or not to ask. I don't know if he did. I never.
But did he tell you that?
Oh, well, the group did. And what I mean by the group is this: Mom's and Dad's dear friends that I grew up with. You, as a child of parents that worked on the atomic bomb, didn't think it was anything different. We didn't really know questions to ask. You accepted the fact that your parents' friends would get together, and some of the really, really smart PhDs would bring their nuclear physics, chemistry papers that they were writing for international symposiums, okay? And they would be bringing the books that they were published in to show their friends at the Oak Ridge reunions, okay? I didn't see anything any different growing up as a kid. I just did. Right. You accept it. And so that's where I'm hoping whoever's watching this podcast, the kids need to learn to ask more, be more inquisitive.
Yep.
You wish that you had been more inquisitive.
I'm wishing that I had been more inquisitive.
You could have found out what you know now if you knew, if you asked questions as a little kid, you would have been, because they would have shared a lot more.
Yeah, but
That's everybody.
The thing about it is, everybody worked there behind the fence. They were all told, what you see here, what you say here, stays here.
Yeah.
Vegas rules.
That's hilarious.
Loose lips sink ships.
I got a small little story about Vegas and Oak Ridge.
Okay. Yeah.
They compartmentalized everything. So even the women that Denise interviewed for the book, The Girls of Atomic City, okay, found it difficult and to talk about what they did, and all the men that Denise interviewed, whatever. However, my father somehow knew, and he didn't really tell us why, that he even wrote his brother, who was a medic in Fiji, that said, and he wrote it in somehow the Puckett code. Evidently, the boys had some code. So they would read letters coming and going out of Oak Ridge. Yeah. And if they didn't like something leaving, they'd burn it. People wouldn't get them.
Wow. So if you sent a letter, it had to be approved.
Yeah.
Was there a stamp on it?
Jim, good question. I do not know.
Wonder if
my uncle got the letter evidently, and in the letter realized that something big was going to be happening in the Pacific area.
Is your uncle still alive?
No, he was born in 1912.
Okay. Do you know if any of those letters exist? It'd be great if you could look at one and see.
Jim, I need to ask. I don't know if Uncle Jesse kept him. I'll have to ask Marcia. That's a good question. You all put me on the spot, and I'm saying
it's just
a
a
lot of it I don't know. But this is what Dad said. But we have a tremendous paper trail. Mother kept all of her pay receipts. Mother's got Daddy's badge number, the whole business. Okay, but my whole point to this is that people were figuring it out.
Right.
Now, a very dear friend of ours was Virginia Spivey. And she married one of the top nuclear chemists in the world. He came during the process. She was there a year after Mother, and was one of the first women to graduate in chemistry from University of North Carolina. She had figured it out, and was on a ship. A ferry in Washington, D.C. on vacation when the bomb dropped. And people were saying, who knew? I can't believe this. This really is unbelievable. What has just happened? And then and Spy sitting there go, I knew. And people looked at her like she was, like she was John Hendrickson crazy.
She was a girlfriend of your mother's, who was also...
She's the last living girl of Atomic City. She died, and this is funny, she died on December 7th, 2019 at the age of 97 and a half. So she died on Pearl Harbor Day after being the chemist for the atomic bomb. Brilliant. Three kids, all of them National Merit Scholars at Oak Ridge High School. Just, and one son is working on some major satellite or stuff. He won't even tell us what he's working on. The man that sang in Mom's and Dad's wedding, and I'm not quite sure what he did, ended up being with the CIA. So these people that Mom and Dad work with, that I grew up with, just really spread out and just have done phenomenal work after the war. So Mother but what she was doing when the bomb dropped, and Dad said he knew, and I can't remember what Dad said he was doing when he heard, but they were still working. People in Oak Ridge didn't know if it was going to happen. Okay, they were going about their routine, because Mom routine was very much the same. The numbers changed. I think she this is one thing I never asked her. Could you tell that the purity was changing? Never ask her that.
Because they were refining it, and what's it called?
Productizing it or refining it? Yeah.
It's it's what the Iranians are being accused of doing.
Processing?
Refining the uranium. You refine it and then refine it and then refine it, and it gets more and more potent to it where it's weapons grade. It's not nuclear power grade. Yeah. They take it even further. I guess that's what you're alluding to.
Right, and that's exactly right. And all this time, everything was so siloed. You weren't aware where the product was coming from. But then I did some reading last night to kind of kickstart my memory bank here, and things were scrambling at Oak Ridge because the gaseous diffusion wasn't working the way it was supposed to work. But they realized the gaseous diffusion, which was through membranes, through hydrogen, you take U-238 and mix it with hydrogen fluoride, hexachloride 6.
No one take this information and go make their own atomic bomb. Do not do this at home.
You can read about it. It's in the Google machine, Wikipedia. Okay. But they couldn't get it to get refined enough. So they knew that the electromagnetic process was more labor intensive, more electrical intensive and whatnot. But so they took the refinement from gaseous diffusion at K25 and brought it over to Y12, 9731 and the 92014 buildings that I was telling you about. And with the calutrons to further refine it. And that's when, like in June of 44, the parabolic was here. And then Oppenheimer dropped those marbles in the glass vase and said, this is the product that we've gotten. That was just the few amount that was delivered in June of 1944. Well, yeah.
Maybe 45.
The refinement, and when it was delivered, it was in, I think, the beginning of, in the end of 44 or 45, because the refinement process, it ended up just going a straight kind of really 45-degree angle curve up on this graph. And I've got it on the computer, but I don't have it to show y'all up on this graph. So it started getting delivered probably at the fall of 44, let's say.
Yeah, I bet it was a year out.
It had to have been close to a year out for it to work, okay? With the canisters and stuff, and then it went up. It started going up with the ability for it to refine, and the delivery process of this was very interesting. You would think, God, these guys were under danger doing it, but they literally, in the spy movies, you see the aluminum suitcases with the strap to their hand.
Yeah.
Well, This is what they did. They had the product in these canisters, in aluminum suitcases, guys that looked like businessmen, and they took circuitous routes. They would leave Oak Ridge on a bus and maybe go to Knoxville to catch a train, or another time leave Oak Ridge on a bus and go to Chattanooga to catch a train.
And I bet they had people maybe uniformed guards, but they probably had undercover people who were like Secret Service or who are in suits or whatever, you wouldn't know that they're actually keeping an eye on them, to make sure that nobody enters.
Stepping out of line, getting information out that shouldn't be getting out.
Yeah, and just something real quick, I'll quickly segue to, and that is espionage. I think, because I watched a really good documentary on this too, on the History Channel, I believe, and do you know anything about there being a Soviet plant that was a part of Oak Ridge that was feeding info back? Because I think Stalin, there's a great story on Harry Truman was, I think...
They were the Rosenbergs.
It was the Rosenbergs. They were involved
I know Michael Rosenberg.
Well, the Rosenbergs were
They were involved in Manhattan Project.
They were the spies.
Okay, well,
I mean, you can check on the Google machine. I didn't go. I didn't study that last night.
I know that
I forgot, but I think the Rosenberg name. I could be wrong.
I thought that was later, but I thought there was an engineer who was accused of, supplying tipping. I do know that Stalin had an idea that we were working on this, and of course they were working on it too, and
the Germans too.
It may have been at Potsdam Conference. No, it wasn't Potsdam. I don't remember where it was that when they dropped the bomb. Truman was with Stalin at a conference or a meeting, and he was told, "Yes, sir, it happened, and it was successful." And he told Stalin. They took a break in the meeting, and he walked over and told Stalin, "Well, we've created an atomic bomb, and we just dropped it on Japan, or we have an atomic bomb. It hadn't dropped yet." And Stalin said, "Good. I hope you will use it against the Japanese." So, anyway.
So the Rosenbergs were involved at Oak Ridge, and I was reading from Wikipedia there, but I want to make sure it's
That's right.
elsewhere as well. And there's a government website through the U.S. Department of Energy that talks about their involvement.
They were executed.
Yeah, it doesn't look like due to the Oak Ridge incident from what I could find it. In February 1944, Rosenberg and Julius
and Ethel.
Julius Rosenberg succeeded in recruiting a second source of Manhattan Project information, engineer Russell McNutt, who worked on designs for the plants at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. For this success, Rosenberg received a $100 bonus. And so they were actually American, but convicted of spying for the Soviet Union.
Yeah. At least I remembered the name. That's okay. So all of this about what was going on in the life and whatever. Now, the Girls of Atomic City is very interesting because, you had all these women that were working and their husbands or loved ones or brothers and sisters brothers were dying in the war or had died in the war. One lady in the Girls of Atomic City, brother died at Pearl Harbor. He was in the Arizona. But it's what's so amazing, and another reason, and I particularly was not pleased with Oppenheimer from the regard that it was a little sexist in my view, but I'm not going to go into that, other than the fact that these women, they were working at Oak Ridge, but when they married, a lot of them quit working. When they married, they quit working. Their husbands would continue to work. They might be an Army guy or a guy that worked in the X-10 doing something or whatever. They quit working. It was amazing that women would do that. However, there was a family she was from Nashville, and they had eight people living in one trailer. And they had different shifts, and they would sleep 24 hours a day. It would sleep 24 hours a day in one trailer. How these people lived during that time was amazing. And of course, then there were African Americans that were totally segregated. And they were living in just basic tents, really. Women couldn't live with their husbands if they were on the janitorial staff or help cook. And they were in what was called the Scarborough area. And they mentioned that, John Hendricks mentioned that because it was a community. And it was unbelievable what the African Americans lived through because of the segregation back then. And there's the lady, and I've got all the girls that were living's autograph in this book.
That's awesome.
Yeah. when the book came out.
Yeah, let's have a look at it.
And I've shown that. Yeah, and
Probably
then
not in focus, but
the signatures are.
oh wow.
Mother was not able, due to her dementia, to do it, but we made a stamp of her signature, and so they've stamped the cast of characters with the ladies' signatures.
So how many were living when you got them to sign? All of them?
I'd have to count. I think there were. I think I got like 7, 8 signatures.
This
maybe.
book is only about 20 years old?
No, just 12.
12 years.
It came out in 2013.
Okay.
Mother was interviewed the first time in June of 2010. By Denise. What I was saying, where was I?
The women.
So, yeah,
The women. Oh yeah. So this and the Scarborough lady and Scarborough about that, and the lady Strickland. What was her first name? I can't remember her first name. Well, anyway, Mrs. Strickland. She missed making biscuits so much that she had one of the construction guys make a biscuit pan for her, so she could make biscuits, and she would make biscuits over the wood burning stove in her hut, so she could have biscuits. And she still, when she was interviewed for this book in 2010, she still had her pan that she had made, and was living in the Oak Ridge area, and she would send money back to her kids and her mother, who kept the kids while they were up in Oak Ridge, because they made so much more money than they did when they were working as janitors at Auburn University. So the stories were phenomenal. But it was just interesting that the women that were, that a lot of the women that did not have a college education because of what their parents and what their lifestyle was, they just quit and stopped working. So that meant that Oak Ridge needed more and more people to come in and work, okay? So by the height of Oak Ridge burned more electricity per day than New York City did.
Wow.
Oh, gosh.
That's incredible to think about. Yeah.
That's
Really?
I wanted to bring that little statistic out. It was phenomenal about what was done by the Manhattan Project. And when you hear now, people say we need another Manhattan Project when it comes to this in the government or that in the government or whatever. And it makes me proud.
Yep.
It really makes me proud to know that.
Japan, round 2's coming.
Well, no, it makes me proud to know that term is used, but it is used as for peaceable terms.
Right.
But
Great
for
works
using
projects.
the
Right.
great works and the phenomenal project management that was done by the Army and everybody else, when you did not have instant communication, really.
Right.
Just think about it. It is amazing to me.
One of the greatest collaborative efforts, maybe the greatest collaborative effort.
Kind of the parallel with that would be after the Second World War, Ike becomes president, and the freeway systems that he put in, that was a big, public works that
Absolutely.
really benefited the nation, with transportation and within.
And before then, Panama Canal with Theodore Roosevelt leading the charge there.
And the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Yeah, the TVA.
And of course Hoover Dam and Cooley Dam and all them.
Yeah.
That's the damn truth, okay? So, but I do want to mention this too. What is so even amazing, and we're talking about silos. Truman, vice president, was not aware of the Manhattan Project. He did not know about it until after the death of FDR in April of 45.
Wow.
So within less than 3 months, he had that on his shoulders to determine what to do and if it was
the
right
fate of
to
Japan
do.
and the world. Yeah.
And this book, Road to Surrender, I have not read yet, but it brings out the three men that were responsible and the decision making about the atomic bomb. I have not read this yet, I will admit. The audience has seen several books here, okay?
I heard, Bev, that Truman was asked later, before he died, he was asked during the Cold War and the arms race that was starting to heat up, and he was asked, would you knowing what you know now, would you have done it? Would you go back and change anything? And he said no. He said, I would have done it again because of the sheer will and determination the Japanese soldiers had, and they were training the population. If we had invaded the homeland, formally,
the casualties would have been far greater on both
American
sides.
casualties would have been really bad, and so
and really, again, I'm not saying this as a great thing, just as far as fact as I understand it, that we also killed more and caused more destruction to Japan via fire bombings, napalm fire bombings, than both of those. And there was actually a third atomic bomb planned on one of their other cities that if Japan did not surrender. And I was rewatching Truman's actually second warning. So there's the warning that he gave ahead of the Hiroshima bombing, saying, "Hey, if Japan, you do not surrender, you're going to face total destruction." And then the second warning he gave. He gave the second warning like shortly after, and that was, I think, the first time the public had been made aware of not just, hey, we dropped the bomb, but these atomic bombs even exist after the first one had really been used. Again, beyond just testing, right? Out near Los Alamos. But one thing that I found out really quickly, then we jumped back, I found interesting that Hiroshima, they had what was called the Hiroshima Electric Company that was running tram systems all throughout the city. A handful of those actually survived the bomb. And within a couple weeks, they had some of them restored. Those were used to get casualties out of the city, get workers in the city, move around troops. And it was just amazing to hear within a few weeks they were able to recover some of those trams. And I guess even within a matter of days, they had like the first couple being worked. But just another little tidbit of history that you don't really typically hear.
And the final thing to say about what you just said is that, that war, everything in normal life stopped, and went to the effort of that war. It was just such a talk about a drain on, humanity.
Well, and one other, I guess, quick comment that you were talking about, like, just the immense collaboration that was happening, and well outside the United States as well. That sure, there's probably some research that was going on in the United States before the Manhattan Project really got kickstarted in the way it did, but it was really a lot of the initial research was headed up by the British, and then the Canadian. I forgot organization, what it's called, joined the British forces in starting this atomic bomb research and figuring out how they could use it against Germany or the Axis powers. And then it wasn't until they brought in the United States that really started kicking up the research and production, both with the funding and then the industrial might that they didn't really have built up.
And the interesting thing about this is we were doing it, we meaning that collaboration, the Allied versus the Axis, because of Germany.
Yep.
They were trying to beat Germany, and this is where my life goes full circle. But I want to talk about where I started, about I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And I want and the family story, and that Pucketts have always joked about 6 degrees of separation. We've reduced it to 1.5 degrees, and this has a little bit to do with Hollywood. Okay, this is a cold chills story. It gives you cold chills. A lot of people, I've met several, I grew up with, kids whose parents met because of the atomic bomb too, in a way. I'm not the only one out there that can say that, okay? Right. And for instance, Van Kirk, who was the navigator on the Enola Gay's daughter, lives here in town, okay? And I have not met her. I met recently giving a talk to Gwinnett County, Rockwell, Newton, Emergency Resource Corps, a gentleman whose father was in charge of security at Oak Ridge. And I said, boy, I bet he knew Mother, because she was so busy, she lost her badge, and everybody at the security office knew Mother and had her badge number memorized, 2449. But he was chosen to be the last person to take the product to Los Alamos. And he stood up and talked about that while I was giving my talk back in January at that Reserve Corps, which was really interesting. And I'd like to sit down and meet with him a little bit more, because it would keep the story. Our generation is going to keep the story alive, and people like Denise writing the book is going to keep the story alive. So, and I don't know how his parents met or all that, but he's probably here too, maybe as a result of the atomic bomb. My ophthalmologist that took my cataracts out 7 years ago, and turned out we lived a quarter of a mile apart for 2 years. His father worked on the Manhattan, moved after the bomb, I think it was after the bomb, but he was for the reclamation and the resource and recovery of the product, to work on that aspect of it. So that's another small world story. Another small world story that has to do with Las Vegas is my mom worked after the war, and Daddy continued to work after they got married on the peacetime of nuclear. My mother ended up being the lead statistician for water as a nuclear shield, which is a precursor to the nuclear submarines. Her boss was a Dr. William K. Ergen, who coined the phrase the China syndrome. He had 5 kids. I used to play in the sandbox when we would go back, when I was young, and then when we would go back with the 5 kids. The third son got his degree in mechanical engineering at the famous University of Tennessee, and went and got his master's in business at Wake Forest. Went and worked at Procter & Gamble, was bored, hated it, so he and a buddy couldn't find another job. They quit. They went to Vegas. They got kicked out of Vegas for, you guessed it, counting cards.
Oh, wow.
And I would like to credit that to his brilliance, because my dad's baby brother ended up teaching chemistry at Oak Ridge High School. And Dad said, go ahead and take the job, pal, but if you want to teach the kids of the world's smartest chemists and physicists, go ahead. And my uncle ended up teaching them chemistry, believe it or not. He was undaunted gentleman. But so they got kicked out, he and his buddy got kicked out of Vegas, and this was like in 78, 79, maybe, or whatever. And they kept seeing, going into Vegas on flatbeds, these big satellite discs. And they're going, they're using those for something. And they went, I bet you that's to get the TV feed to the hotels. And they went, and Charlie looked at his friend and goes, there's no way that Ted Turner's going to be able to run cable between all these ranches to make it work like he is in Atlanta or wherever. He says, wonder if we can make these dishes smaller. He did. I used to play in the sandbox with the guy that founded Dish Network.
Wow. If you're still around, whatever your name is, if you're looking to get into the new age of communications via drone, right here.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up. Another small world story, and this is the one that has a bit of Hollywood to it. As I said, Mother wanted to do work to help the war effort. And 1943, yeah, that's right. 1943, the summer of, she was still at UT, she had learned that one of her first cousin's fiancés was lost at sea. And, everybody was really concerned about, and letters were going back and forth between the cousins and Mother and her father, and because it was her father's oldest sister's, one of his daughters, named for Mom's aunt. And so, and Mother knew that Cece had left Indiana and had gone to Washington, D.C., because Cece had just given up that Russ was dead. But that a friend of Cece said, no, go, look, just to ease your mind, I've heard that there's this fortune teller, and she maybe could ease your mind. She's supposed to be really good. So Cece went to the fortune teller, and she was working at some shipyard, I think, in D.C. I can't remember exactly where. But so she went, and the fortune teller looked at her palm or whatever and said, he's still alive. You will see him again. The atomic bomb saved his life. He was the pilot of the plane that went down in the Pacific that has been memorialized in the book Unbroken with Louis Zamperini.
Also the author of Seabiscuit. Wow.
Zamperini was the
And
bombardier.
Zamperini was the navigator.
Navigator, bombardier, yeah.
So C.C.
He
Phillips.
was a POW, in Japanese POW.
C.C. Phillips, Mom's first cousin, featured in the book Unbroken, ended up marrying Russell Allen Phillips, and they would never gotten out of the prisoner of war camp if the atomic bombs had not been dropped.
That's true.
And Karen is
true.
living to tell the story, and she lives here in Atlanta. And
So she also would not be alive,
and
right?
she would not
wouldn't
be
have
alive
been born.
if it wasn't for the atomic bomb. So we're two cousins that can say that. And
So I think really your main story here ought to be that nuclear weapons are good because they're going to create. No, I'm kidding.
nuclear.
But yeah, so I think that is a phenomenal small world story
Yeah.
about that, and especially since Louis was so big into sports, and he even held the hand, shook Hitler's hand. And then it's really weird because my parents' life ended up revolving around sports later on, which is really interesting as well, of how all of this kind of just comes together. And Mom and Dad ended up having a good friend that also shook Hitler's hand because he used to ski he skied in the 1936 Winter Olympics.
Okay, I didn't know that. I have seen quite a few of older video clips that, again, I'm not saying Hitler's a great guy or whatever by any stretch of the imagination, but you do actually see him for more as a person, like he's joking around,
he was
like dancing, like being silly, and it's like everyone here could actually probably have had a good conversation with Hitler, as much as that's against the grain to say, like, oh no, of course, if you have the ability to go back in time, you just kill him, right?
The German people are smart people, and for one individual to capture the thought and the imagination that he did, he had to have some gifts. There's no question. He was a leader, had leadership qualities, but too bad they were evil.
Okay.
Well, all we're saying is that, at the end of the day, human beings are human beings. They can be very evil and have bad intent, but we're still all people. We're humans. But anyway.
Well, I grew up with a girlfriend whose mother had a picture of Adolf Hitler and
talk about
Nazi swastikas
this
on the
is
wall.
Operation Paperclip, and this is more going into the Cold War, right? So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I did have another quick comment. Actually,
after this? Yes. Can we take a short break?
The Atomic Girls, the Girls of Atomic City, just reminds me a lot of still post World War II. Just more broadly speaking, there was a big problem, if you will, that housewives were used to doing all of this wartime work, right? That was really required of our country. Everyone that was of a working body condition was kind of expected to work and use those skill sets. And then a lot of the housewives that still wanted to work after the fact really had nowhere to go. There wasn't like a consumer electronics industry here in the United States up until like the late 40s, really early 50s of Silicon Valley. You get a couple of investors that come in and spend $2 million back in like 53, maybe even earlier, before there's even like a product that it can be built around to start developing transistors, which then of course did get used throughout the Cold War and the space race efforts. But it was amazing to look back and see some of this early footage from the 50s that housewives in the factories doing what we would consider advanced technician sort of soldering work, putting together these transistors. And that's again what I think we're losing out a lot of here in America. Not that we should be like, hey, everyone needs a factory job, but again, without a real core industrial manufacturing base, you don't really have a country. And
that leads me to a good point here.
Can we take a break?
Let's take a break.
And then we'll come back. If you just want to mention it really quick,
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay,
we'll take the break.
Just want.
This leads perfect segue.
Perfect. Sync, and then we can just pick right back up. Perfect. And we're back. Bev, we're just about to start with some material you had in front of you wanted to cover.
Well, you were talking about the. I wanted you to see if you wanted to continue a little bit more with your thoughts about women post-war and the you were talking about the computer chip industry and the electronics industry and the transistors and how there was such a gap that the expertise that the women gained back in the war and projects like Rosie the Riveter and welding and all that, as well as like chemists like Spy and statisticians like my mom, what were they going to do?
Right.
And so there was a gap that followed, but then as a result, the gap that followed resulted in us baby boomers. Okay, so that is.
And to clarify,
Yeah, you're baby boomer. I'm Gen X, and you're
first year
Gen Y.
Zoomer.
You're a Z,
yeah,
Gen Z.
Most of my class was millennial, being born in '96, but then I was born March of 1997.
All right, so boomer is 46, 64. Gen X is 65 to what, 85 or 84?
Yeah, something along.
And then
that.
Gen Y.
No, then it's millennial.
Then millennials.
And millennial is whatever 80s to 96, and then Zoomer is 97 to
Gen Z.
Yeah,
Zoomer.
yeah, Gen Z,
Gen
but
Z.
it's then often.
There's not a Gen Y.
No, and then after Gen Z
Alpha.
is Gen Alpha.
Oh God, they're
Yeah.
like coming up now. They're the little geniuses that.
They're the ones that will probably start interning with us here in the next handful of years. Yeah.
And I would just say maybe a little bit of your technology to brief Bev on what you're doing with drones, because she hasn't heard. Just you share a little bit, because she may have ideas as to other people to have on this podcast that could be more targeted to iVue.
No, I don't know about that.
Actually, but the applications are
Right,
so
like-
widespread, right? That's the crux of your whole.
Right, and it's like I fail in my definition of success in life if, maybe not you in particular, but someone with your technical acumen and no care for drones whatsoever, other than like, hey, I care about drones at least to the degree I care about Jacob, and I know he really likes drones. But beyond,
That's true.
But beyond that, it's like if I don't get everyone interested in buying a drone and then buying and using a drone on a daily basis, and that means the everyday mom, father, roofer, farmer, anybody and everybody in between, I failed. And so again, it's like, why would I even want a drone right now? It's like, well, there's already millions of people, literally millions of people, more than 1 million just in the United States, that buy a drone for no commercial purpose.
For entertainment.
Just for entertainment,
Camera.
recreation, right? Again, essentially as a toy. And it's like a lot of those, many hundreds of thousands, if not, again, also in the millions, already cost $2,000, $3,000 or more. And all it does is it's your own personal flying camera. So what if you're spending that same amount of money, right, where there's already a market of 2+ million people globally, 1 million+ people in the United States willing to spend this much money on this type of device, but beyond just taking photos and videos, that same drone could also do your deliveries from your house to the local Amazon locker, or even bring your return to the local UPS store, right? You could pick up a small to medium-sized order of groceries. If you have kids and you're sick of them playing video games inside all day, have them go play video games, with the drone playing laser tag, as one of the examples. And that's just where, it's all so widespread on what we're doing, but we're just focusing on the common hardware and software platform. And yes, we're building some of the applications, some of the modules that can be used across many of those different industries, but we're never going to be the best people, making drones for roofing or drones for farming or drones for any one set purpose. But we can build, the best drone that can do 85 to 90% as well as those sort of custom use platforms. So I guess that's a little bit of an overview for how much you care to even respond to that. But
I think another way of saying it, you have a vision. Tell me if I've got this right.
Hopefully with no mental institution in my future.
He has a vision that drone use and applications and everyday use of drones is going to be very different in the future than it is right now. Because right now it's small, and he's saying that there's a lot more applications, and that his interest ultimately, if you boil it all the way down, I would say this is to change the world with drones.
Right. Well, I'm
and make it more accessible, like more tangibly speaking, minimize the geographical barriers that keep people from one another, from the cargo or the like actual physical goods that they care about most, information that they want to go collect, that they might not have access to, but they can get a drone out there, right? Even if it's not their own drone. And then of course, over time, beyond just closing the gap between information and goods, actually closing the gap between people, where you can get in your own passenger drone and fly it or have it fly itself to where you want.
UPS and FedEx, I mean, all the packages and stuff that they deliver, I don't think it's far-fetched at all to think that in the future they're going to be they'll have a drone airport essentially at their location. The drones will just be constantly taking off, coming into land to restock, and they'll, your package will be dropped by drone in your front yard or
with
backyard.
all the talk around USPS, I think, especially if we want to live in a country where we're more self-reliant and less reliant on the government and the services that oftentimes just economically cannot make sense, that you as a homeowner are responsible for collecting your own mail, but instead of driving to the post office or what, you send your own drone to pick up your mail.
And you don't have CO2 emissions from your car, and you don't have gasoline costs.
The labor costs, and again,
you don't run
drones
the risk,
taking our jobs.
You don't run the risk of an accident in your car, because many accidents happen within a small, diameter or whatever, proximity to your home.
Right.
It's not necessarily the long haul trip. It's just running to the market and you have an accident. So anyway, there's just lots of,
Yeah, and I guess one other quick way to kind of summarize where I see, and you touched on this beautifully, even in the 40s, that people still wasn't 100% commonplace that everyone owned a car and knew how to drive them. And that was 4 decades after the automotive industry kind of took off, in any sort of real capacity, even though it was really around since the late 1880s. And so really 60 years, before even, again, the interstate system, which is, kind of just taken for granted for how accessible it makes cars and, travel for us. And it's like, we're still in like those Model T moments of the automotive industry and the drone industry.
Yep.
Obviously still lots of money to be made before it gets to the point that the automotive industry is today. So it's not like we're at the Wright brothers level, inventing the drone either. Right. But the way I like to tangibly see like the difference of like where car operators used to be called that, right? But now you operate a car, you're just a human, right? That's part of the human condition. Same thing with operating a computer. You used to be a computer operator, or there used to literally be like NASA titles for people. They were called computers, right? In the same way they were called calculators as well.
Like in the movie Hidden Figures.
I'm not familiar, but yeah.
For NASA, they called women that did statistical work computers. They might have called my mother a computer. I don't think she ended up programming the first IBM computer in Tennessee for production. She turned an accounting IBM computer into a computational production computer. And with the old punch cards, but she did that. And
again, you go talk to those people that everyone is going to be using a computer, yet no one's going to have the title computer. That's far-fetched, sort of imaginary. And here we are, where there's, in the United States, about 2 million drone operators. About half of those are commercially registered, making money, or at least attempting to make money with a drone or drone business of some sort. And then there's, again, about 1 million of them just strictly recreational, right? So all in all, you have about 2 million drone operators out there. It's only a matter of time before that becomes 20 million, 200 million, 2 billion, and then literally 6+ billion people, not drone operators anymore. It's just
they use it. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. All right.
Well, yeah, I've got interesting about that because of the growth and what all's going to happen. Because I know I don't want to talk about politics, but at the same time, I see this as a win-win for young entrepreneurs like yourself. But I also possibly see it as a problem for voyeurism et cetera, that could occur as a result of that, and where the legal ramifications and liability would come in from a legal standpoint. And that's where you come in with governmental rules and whatnot that do concern me, okay? Yep. And I also see an issue where we might have to be looking at a registration and a taxing situation if there are going to be that many out there because of that's just
we don't
me.
Want this podcast. Maybe this is a secondary thing.
I know, and I just didn't want to get into that, but I'm just giving you
I'm saying don't wind Jacob up too much.
No, I'm just giving you my vision on that.
We want to knock off in about 30 minutes, so this is another topic. Really.
I know it is, and I'm just.
Thanks for getting us started on it, Jim.
I just wanted you said to do it, and you wanted my input based on my background. That I wanted just to give you my 2 or 3 cents on that, because I'm also concerned right now is what's going to happen to road taxes. If there are that many, how are we going to maintain our roads? And this is bringing this near term, okay? How are we going to maintain our roads and more people get electrical vehicles? They're not paying gasoline tax. So that's something that I've been thinking about, but I haven't gone to the Google machine or asked somebody, and what they're planning down the road is to maintaining our lifestyle that we're used to and maintaining our roads and bridges.
Another aspect.
Another aspect of it. And so, right now, we're trying to, at Oak Ridge is thinking forward about that with the Department of Energy that started a decade or plus or more ago about reclaiming these sites at Oak Ridge for the future of nuclear power. Jim's father, general manager of a nuclear power plant. Oak Ridge is now starting through the work of many previous administrations, Manhattan Project 2, because of using nuclear power on a smaller scale to help do the AI computer revolution, okay? And a company called Kairos, have you heard of them?
No, I haven't.
Okay, no. Kairos is in Oak Ridge right now, and they are building and operating the Hermes lower power demonstration reactor to demonstrate our capability to deliver clean and safe, affordable nuclear heat, and to do thermal power level of 35 million with the MWTH. I didn't see what that meant. Megawatts, million is, or whatever megawatts, and so it's going to be yes.
Yep,
that's the technology.
Mega terawatt hour.
Terawatt.
That's what that might.
Thank you. And then Orano.
Who was it that's taking the 3 Mile Island plant? Intel or Amazon or what? One of the big. They're restarting the reactor that went out after 3 Mile Island. They're going to take it and restart it to power an AI.
Microsoft.
It's Microsoft. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, well, Oak Ridge is in the bottom line. I'm just saying that Oak Ridge, we've jumped over the atomic bomb, and we really haven't talked about the radioactive isotopes and what it's done for nuclear medicine and, and prenatal care and the supercomputer that Oak Ridge has had. And even Oak Ridge's connection with the world famous body farm at the University of Tennessee. What Oak Ridge has done with that is remarkable, where people, when Denise goes on her book tour, they go, does Oak Ridge still exist? They don't even know. People didn't even know that. And Denise has kind of helped through her appearance on PBS and on Jon Stewart and MSNBC and NBC and all these stations that interviewed Denise about this book when it came out. It had such a good following that it really helped promote that and look forward with what the women have done and what women can do down the road. Now, I wanted to bring up the fact, and I ran quickly over what Oak Ridge has done peacetime, and it's continuing to do it, and taking the land and repurposing it with the use of, the Corps of Engineers and all of that. And Oranos is out, is like one of the largest companies, nuclear companies in the country, and it's supplying reactors with enriched uranium. And there's called Oranos Project IKE is designed to continue this performance to provide a reliable, significant domestic nuclear fuel supply for U.S. advanced reactors. That's going to be done at Oak Ridge in a 750,000 square foot building. Now, I have seen the world's most secure building. It is at Y12. It is in Oak Ridge. It
More
is
than
just,
Fort Knox? Mm-hmm. Wow.
This building will withstand. I mean, it will stand basically for not anything. And you drive by it, and you see a building that was built 9731 back in 1942, and maybe a stone's throw away on Y12 site, which is just, it really is like otherworld. You drive by it, and you have to go through a lot to even be able to get on site there. But Mother spoke at Y12. Mother spoke at 9731 in 2010, representing the workers, and spoke to 14,000 for like a lot of different people, 42 busloads of people for 10 hours one day about her work. It was amazing. And to get there, the bus driver drove us by the world's most secure building, and it looks like something out of a James Bond movie and then some. Okay. It's
secret layer, sort of.
Well,
yeah.
And it's strange. Yeah. It's pentagonal. It's not hexagonal, which would have been really interesting because of hexachlorophloor. But anyway, and they've got turrets with snipers there 24/7, and it's just layers and layers and layers of security. And the way it's built, because it stores the nuclear product, the most nuclear product in the world is there.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it has to.
And this is for weapons usage, right?
Weapons grade.
Well, yeah. Yeah,
maybe.
Maybe. I think it's got other layers to it as well that can be utilized, because
if it fell into the wrong hands, it would be.
Well, you don't want it in the wrong hands. And then one of these companies, I don't remember if it's Orono or if it's Kairos, they have a company in Kentucky that's building the tubes. So, you're building the tubes, so when the power uranium is produced at Orono, at Oak Ridge, in that big facility that they're building, that's been in the works for quite a while, then that it's put in those tubes.
Those generating tubes.
The generating tubes, but also for delivery, for secure delivery.
And my dad said that when they load those tubes, the uranium is refined down to a pellet about the size of your little first joint on your pinky finger. And he said that they put them in tubes and rods, tubes, and then those are all bundled together and then put in they're grouped together, and then those are put down in the reactor vessel itself, right? And you have these, once the reaction starts, if it gets out of control or what to control it, you insert your rods, and they're made out of what are they made of? They absorb. They keep the reaction under control, and if you drop all the rods in, it stops the nuclear reaction.
And I do not know what they're made of, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, like cadmium or something. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I saw a pretty good, or I thought to be a good visualization. There's a great HBO miniseries called Chernobyl. And,
I think I saw that. Yeah. But last thing on this, my dad said that when they put the rods in there, they have suits on and whatnot, but he said they handle them by hand. They actually put them in by hand and stick them in the old-fashioned way, and then they weld the ends, and you've got your rod. So anyway, shall we?
Well, you were more technical. Thanks, Jim.
I grew up with the nuclear family, So we want to recap or just kind of tie in?
Well, yeah, I want to kind of. Tie this in together about what you said about the women. And since I'm here because of the fact that my mom and, of course, my dad are mentioned in the Girls of Atomic City, and I'm very humbled and honored, to be able to speak on their behalf. My mother was literally a force of nature, not to use a term, because my mother was unbelievable. She could own a room. If you're wittiest, it's in high school, it's going to tell you something, okay? And because of she got involved with this from having just being who she is, but going to a big event in Oak Ridge, and I introduced her to the historian of Y12, and he basically just fell in love with her. He says, we need to use her as a spokesperson because she speaks so well, and she's just atypical of what I'm used to with somebody with her, her ability. So this one I'm really proud of. She was I never thought my mother would be a centerfold, but she was. And she featured her as the lead alumni in the Torchbearer magazine in 2011 for the spring edition.
That's awesome.
And they go over her work on the atomic bomb, and that she's standing at the back of beautiful Ayers Hall. I put that up earlier with, her life story and her pictures of what she does currently. And there she is with some little guy by the name of Peyton Manning.
Who? Yeah, that's.
And then the picture of Mother and Dad at her induction when she got inducted in the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. So my brothers and I are the only persons in the world, I think, that can say that our mother worked on as a nuclear scientist, but is also in their respective state sports hall of fame. That's not intimidating, is it? No, not at all. But because of my mother's sense of humor, I wanted to bring this up as well. She has, D. Ray Smith, the historian, has now retired for Y12 and is now retired, but is still very active, pushing the history of Oak Ridge. And he did a compendium of, historically speaking, articles from the Oak Ridger newspaper and put them in some books. And these were the ones in 2007. And then I read earlier about John Hendrick's story, the one from the 2006, historically speaking. And a lot of women have put stories in here. Mother wrote 2 that are in this one, in the 2006. And in the article on 2006, I'm going to just do a brief kind of transpose what she said without reading it. Is that when she would go home, people would ask her what she was doing, and she would say, "Oh, well, I'm doing nothing but making a little red wagon." Okay.
I was wondering what that book was. Yeah.
Okay. So I got a call this year from D. Ray, and D. Ray wanted a text, and he says, "I want you to call me. I've got some news about your mother and her saying." So I called him, and I burst into tears almost. A young lady moved to Oak Ridge with her family as an environmental scientist, and she's a minority, and read these books and fell in love with the statement, Mother said, making a little red wagon. And Katantra was very big into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Now you're talking his language.
And so she wrote a children's book called Making a Little Red Wagon.
And this is actually a little red wagon you can't ride in, and it's not because the front seat is broken and the axle is dragging. I don't know if either of you get that reference.
No, but it says on the back, "Can a little red wagon change the world? Join Hal and Jesse on an exciting adventure to build the most extraordinary little red wagon." Inspired by the incredible work in the secret city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Making a Little Red Wagon celebrates how everyone's unique contributions can make a big difference. Whether you're a builder, a scientist, a dreamer, or a helper, every kind of work is important. This book reminds all readers that remarkable things happen when we all work toward the same mission.
Nice.
That is a beautiful
and
message.
I think this
that ties in with your
values.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
this is a perfect way to kind of tie up exactly what we've been speaking of today. Because I don't mean to get emotional, but the people that have gone, the greatest generation really is the greatest generation. And I love what Denise has done. And like this book these are our voices. They're people that have written stories, and Mama's stories is phenomenal.
Right.
And growing up knowing about, Cece and her husband and what they went through with his PTSD is just the heart-wrenching stories, but at least he lived, okay? So
that's
Mr. and Mrs. Puckett.
yes. And so that's Mom and Dad at Mom's induction
Thanks, Brian.
in the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. Excuse me, I didn't know I was going to get emotional. I'm sorry, but I always have said that it's that they're up in the sky with the greatest generation, telling stories whether they be true or false. And hopefully they're not in silos anymore, so they can share every story like we're able to do today.
It's a very interesting story, and
I'm sorry.
interesting guest, Beverly Puckett, our guest today.
Yeah, well, Bev, thank you for joining us and opening up, sharing your stories about how you've been connected with this. I mean, again, world-changing part of history. And
the book again. Can you show the book? Just the group. The book is "The Girls of Atomic City," and who's the author?
Denise Kiernan. And Denise's story is she also is a biology science major journalist. And part of her claim to fame is she was the lead writer and executive producer on the first season of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
wow.
And and she and her husband Joe is also an author, and she's really got a lot of good personality, but saw the picture of the women at the Calutrons, that famous picture, and just started looking into it. And people wanted to know, Beverly, how come you didn't write the story? And I said, because I didn't think anything was different.
Right, that was your normal life.
That was my life.
Right.
But people look at the story of the famous picture of the women. This picture right here, if you all can see it, sitting at the Calutrons. That's what she was researching, something else, and just saw that picture and wanted to look into it. So, but everybody's family has a story.
Yeah.
And I gave you all initially about a history of my family and the South and Tennessee and all that. And there are other stories that come from there that maybe you all might not have heard the last of me yet either about that. But I know Jim was just sharing about his great-great-grandfather, Ephraim Washington, and you can go and study and look at Ancestry.com to learn more about your family, because there's stories there. And I'm trying to resurrect another story about my family that kind of goes back to Papa Fitzgerald.
It is really humbling to go into our archives. We're in the South Carolina South Carolina State Archives 2 weeks ago or so. One of my brothers and some friend, a cousin and his wife and myself, and my middle brother is very intellectual, and he's really pursuing this, and it's bitten him. I can tell he's really gotten interested in it. My granddad always said we were distantly related to Wade Hampton, the famous Confederate general and later statesman during Reconstruction. And Will is determined, I think, to find that connection. But just finding that we're really ultimately from Virginia, and why did my great grandfather move to South Carolina? But it kind of leads to a conclusion that a lot of Americans, if they dig into their history and trace their past, their roots, it really gets more interesting as to how you wound up being where you are, and
hopefully more connected to your country, right? I mean, I think what you're saying about the greatest generation being the greatest generation, in some cases they were forced to, right? When we had the draft going on. In other cases, it's like,
answered.
I am proactively going to choose to put my country before myself. And that's just
right.
Not a mentality many, if any, people really have. Again, definitely there are some, but many certainly don't have this day and age. I know always one more, right? But with this talk about ancestry, I know I do too as well, but you're, I think, more connected with your British roots. And I know you had spent some time over there during your Navy service. Is that correct?
Yep.
So this was interesting as I kind of touched on the British forces and the Canadian forces. I forget the actual organizations within each working together on the Manhattan Project, pre-Manhattan Project. It was almost the case where instead of using the Enola Gay to drop Little Boy, they were using they almost had to use some British planes, because the B-29s, they were still being produced, and they had to go through extensive modifications to fit the bombs. And if they were to use the Lancasters, they had to be refueled midair, and they would have only been about half as far away as the B-29s post dropping the bomb, and they probably would have been all right, but it would have been a lot closer of a call where they had still been in the blast radius. And that's, again, something that seems like so core to like the story of the atomic bomb dropping, you know. But again, with any piece of history, there's the surface level what you get taught, but then just endless amounts of information that if you choose to go down, I mean,
you can dig and really understand deeper.
And you'll be surprised how much of history is very little understood.
This is one of the problems I have, not to go political, but the things that we see on the surface, if we were to really dig in and dig down, I think the story would change from what you're being told and what we see, you know, from culture today. If we take any issue, the bigger it is, and the more it affects how it affects more and more people, the more complex it is. Right. My dad always said, nothing's simple, especially if there's something that's significant going on. There's always, you know, like you see the tip of an iceberg, and it's massive underneath the water. Right. So we'll close with that.
Yeah.
Great podcast. Thanks, Bev.
Thank you again for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, you all. What a treat.
Bev.
I didn't mean to get emotional, but hey.
Hey.
I know. I couldn't even make it through without me making Bev cry. What an awful person I am.
No, I did. Well, it's emotional. Thank you. To speak of that, the pride.
A lot of passion.
Yeah, the passion and pride.
Go Vols. We'll close with that. I hope Carolina
or Blue
beats
Raiders, you know, Middle Tennessee.
All right. Good podcast. Thank you, Beef.
Great.